Here we are at the Calvary cross, which is south of the Merville Battery. This was a rendezvous point for the survivors of the assault, and they began to arrive here over the next half an hour. They all came here in small groups, stragglers, that kind of thing. There was no sort of ordered retreat. Various men were sitting around. There was about 22 wounded. They were taken over across the road just there to a stud farm called the Haras de Retz. About 75 men had managed to survive the assault, and they arrived here. The glider, which had landed in a lane just down there towards Gonneville, after a small action which prevented a patrol attacking the battalion while they were carrying out the assault, then came up the road and joined the men here. One of the men of B Company, Len Daniels, who'd actually slid the Bangalore torpedoes beneath the wire to create the gaps, he arrived here and he saw Colonel Otway, who he was no great fan of, sitting on these steps with his head in his hands. And even he, at that stage, felt a great sympathy for him. Colonel Otway had been through so much in the planning, the stress of all the organising, and he'd been exhausted before D-Day, and the cancellation was a bonus to him because it gave him a day's rest, in effect. And when Len saw him sitting here, it crossed his mind that this was only the beginning of D-Day. They still had various objectives to carry out. This is the Haras de Retz. This is where all of the wounded were brought. Also some German medics, one in particular, Hans Kahlenbach, who was extremely helpful in attending the wounded. Eventually he ended up working at the main dressing station at the Menal Crossroads. Many of the men here were very badly wounded, particularly one or two of the officers. Captain Hal Hudson was in a very, very bad state. Eventually a jeep was used to make contact and take the casualties back, the worst ones going first, one of them being Hal Hudson. He was driven back through what was no man's land really, not knowing if there was any Germans about, to the main dressing station where he was later operated on with razor blades, and he actually survived. The 9th Battalion survivors here, 75 of them, had a sort of a slight rest. Colonel Otway decided that there was no way they would be able to carry out their second objectives, which was the knocking out of a radar station over in that direction. So he decided that all the survivors should go to Chateau d'Amfreville and wait for the arrival of the commandos. When the stragglers were coming out of the battery, stood around here just mingling, chatting and saying, "Have you seen so-and-so or so-and-so? Has he survived?" Coming along the road in a kind of a children's barrow was Major Alan Parry, pushing himself. He'd been wounded in the leg and couldn't walk properly and found this barrow. And being quite a character, as he arrived, he pulled out his brandy flask, took a sip and said, "Jolly good battle, what?" And strange as it may have been, it broke the tension. A few people started laughing, but the few German prisoners they had stood there in total bewilderment.